Welcome to another video where I journey my way drawing through the alphabet. So far we've gone through A, B, and C, and now it's time for my report card's favorite letter, D. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this drawing challenge, I'll be choosing a movie, a show, a game, and a location that all start with the letter D. Then I'll combine them into hopefully one coherent drawing. Starting with movies, while there are great and fun ones like Dark Knight, Dune, Despicable Me, I swerved around all of them and found myself at Deadpool's doorstep. This merc with a mouth seemed like the perfect protagonist for this drawing that I had planned out. Up next was shows, and I couldn't really think of any shows that I really wanted to draw, but after a lot of thinking, Danny Phantom just randomly popped into my head, and he never left. Seriously, he's still in there. Please help. But now we're moving on to possibly one of my favorite pastimes, video games. From Devil May Cry to Dead or Alive, the Paradise Edition, there's a wide variety of games to choose from, but I decided to possibly go with one of my favorite games of all time, which is Dark Souls. While it's quite dated and pretty clunky, at least nowadays, I still love this game and I beat it every now and then. Now, all that's left is location, and while I would love to have Firelink Shrine be our setting for the drawing, the last time I checked, it unfortunately does not start with the letter D. But I really wanted to keep the Dark Souls aesthetic, so I decided to have our characters throw hands with each other in a dungeon. So before we have Deadpool, Danny Phantom, and Dark Soul duke it out in a dungeon, please leave a like on this video, subscribe if you want to see more, and most importantly, I just hope you enjoy. The first step that we have to do is the brainstorming and the outline sessions. In the previous videos, these went by pretty quickly, but this one took quite a while. Initially, I knew exactly the kind of layout that I wanted for the drawing. I mainly wanted Deadpool and Danny Phantom facing our antagonist in a dungeon. I just couldn't really figure out who to make for the big bad. Initially, I really wanted to make Vlad Plasmius as our main guy, but I couldn't quite figure out how to incorporate this ghost who honestly does a lot more simping than he does haunting. As you can see here, I kind of made him really big, and I did do multiple different versions as well, but even still I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing. The smart play here would be to make changes or start again, but me not being that smart, I decided to take the lesson I learned from Meet the Robinsons all those years ago and
keep moving forward.
I did a rough inking layer with blue ink, and finally, utilizing perspective lines after saying I would for the past 3 videos, I drew in a pretty rough floor. Rough as in the condition and also my drawing ability. I still couldn't figure Vlad out, and it got to a point that I started hating him about as much as Danny did. Luckily for me, I had the option of ignoring Vlad completely, so I decided to move on to Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder. He's the last, but in my opinion, one of the easiest bosses in the game. Now that I had the main central focal point of my drawing all figured out, I then placed the rest of the pieces onto the canvas, all willy-nilly. Deadpool and Danny will be teaming up to fight this seemingly fearsome but easily parryable foe. And to fill in the empty space on the sides, I added some broken archways because honestly, I just thought they looked pretty cool. Then I thought about adding different ways to incorporate Danny's parents on the side until I finally ended up on a fallen Jack being mourned by an injured Maddie. Or something like that. On Deadpool's side, we had an injured Colossus, and this blue inking layer was finally coming along pretty nicely, but not that nicely, so I chose another slightly darker color and did another layer. I freehanded the background without the use of the straight line tool or the perspective layer, which you can kind of see why it looks pretty slanted, but I was coming to a point where I was, pretty decently okay with what I did with a rough outline. The next step was the final inking layer, and I made sure to take my time to get all the details that I needed. I'm gonna be completely honest, as I was drawing this piece, I wasn't really feeling completely satisfied with the result. But I was stubborn, and I felt like I could make it work, so I just kept going and going and going till I thought I couldn't add anything else in the drawing. There were a few things I had issues with, and if I was smart, I would've and should've made the changes here before moving on to the coloring, because honestly that would've just saved me so much time, but me not being smart, I dove right in. Using the reference images that I collected, like Thanos and the Infinity Stones, pretty topical reference, I was able to easily add all the colors for the selected characters. Deadpool is nice and simple with that red and black, Danny Phantom was equally simple as well, Honestly, all the characters were pretty simple to color in besides Gwyn. I didn't really know what colors to use because the Dark Souls games have a pretty distinct and sometimes very muted color style, so I just chose my best approximation. I also didn't care too much because I knew that I wanted this drawing to be pretty dark and that the darkness would end up hiding most of the colors anyways. Speaking of darkness, I moved on to coloring the background and I just chose a simple shade of whatever this color is to the dungeon palette. Then I added the little bonfire, and this is kind of reminiscent of the previous video's campfire, but this video was just way harder. To get the correct color of the darkness on my characters, I mainly used the hard light effects, and using the tone of the wall, I was able to coat our characters in this brush. I did a lot of little things here, so it's going to be really hard to try to name everything I did, so let me just try to briefly explain everything that happens. Going into the brainstorming session, I really wanted this picture to be very dark and have the only light source come from the fire, but I ran into some problems where I didn't really know if the darkness took away too much from the characters on the screen. Deadpool's design does slowly get drowned out by the darkness, but I thought it was something I had to get over. I also tried my best to fix Danny Phantom's pose because he kinda looks weird, and I figured better late than never, but once I got most of these little details figured out, I wanted to add a lot of the little shadows to get a really dark and dirty feel for this location. This was actually the hardest part of the drawing because I foolishly made most of the background on one layer, so when I went to add the shadows to just one portion of the drawing, like let's say the wall, it would also affect, the arches or the ground, which I didn't really want. So I had to take my time with this and it got a little annoying. But at this point anyways, I hit a pretty big snag. I just frankly wasn't a fan of how I drew everything or how I colored everything. I didn't like how Danny Phantom looked, or Deadpool, or even the grounds, so I figured I might have to make the hard call and just start over again. I hesitantly clicked the new illustration button and I started over, well, not completely over, but pretty much most of my progress was for nothing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this is actually kind of similar to playing Dark Souls, I guess. I happened to lose this boss battle, I just had to start over again and learn from my mistakes to eventually get good. Luckily, as I said before, I didn't have to start all the way over and I was able to utilize the inking layer I did prior. I made Deadpool more prominent, the same with Danny, and then I cleaned up their overlapping lines. I decided to redo the inking layer to clean everything up. I wanted the line work to be a lot neater, and while the characters themselves didn't really change too much from, the first version to this version, I made sure to add a bit more detail to the walls and to fix up the perspective a bit more. Instead of having the door be so big in the back, I made sure to make it fit a bit more in line with how a door that far back should actually look. And then I worked on the archways to make sure I didn't get lazy like I did the first attempt. Once all of these details were done, I made sure to redo the flooring, and I didn't want to half-ass it like I did before, so I really made sure to use the perspective lines fully and properly. This may have been a painstakingly boring process, but I loved it all the same. I haven't had this much fun with bricks since the LEGO movie all those years back, and seeing these pieces feel like they belong together made me a lot more confident with a background, and eventually I was done with the dungeon floor. I made some more minor additions to the back wall, and I also added this pour sap, but I was already feeling so much better with this inking than before. Now comes the fun part. Using the invaluable knowledge from my prior attempt, I made sure to use a lot of different layers for the different depths of this drawing. I made a layer for the foreground characters, mainly Deadpool and Danny, then did a layer for the background characters, gave the same treatment to Gwyn, from there I did a new layer for the foreground rubble, another for the archways, then a layer for that beautifully installed floor, another one for the walls before finally adding a base for the fire. This may seem a bit excessive and it definitely felt that way, but it really helped me out with the shading and the lighting later on. Going back to our main characters, I used multiple hard light layers to darken Deadpool to a good level. Then I used a soft light layer that was used for the highlights. And lastly, using a soft eraser, I gently went over each hard light shadow on areas that I wanted to add gradients between the brightest day and blackest night, so no evil shall escape my sight. Let those... Whoops, wrong Ryan Reynolds. I did the same to Danny Phantom, and this is a show I haven't watched in quite a long time, but I remember it being so good as a child. Does anyone know if it still holds up? Maybe I'll give it a watch and see for myself. Gwyn was the last of our main characters, and although he had a lot more details going on, he was actually really fun to do. Because he was directly in front of the fire, I had to add a whole lot more highlights to his design, and I just had a blast. I really love how the colors kind of pop out more due to the lighting. But after that, I moved on to the side characters and the background before ultimately moving on to darkening the rest of the environment. Because I split all these layers into their own spots in the beginning, it made it so much simpler separating the different darkness layers that I was ultimately going for. Eventually, I was at a place with this drawing where I felt like the darkness was, really there. But I thought maybe it was a bit too much there, so I wanted to add a bit more light to contrast the darkness, so I simply used the airbrush tool and placed it over the fire, and using the blending tool I was able to make it a softer glow. I did some more minor additions off camera, but this was mainly it. At the end of the day, I had a lot of fun with this drawing, but there was a point where I really hated myself for starting over in the middle. If I could go back in time, I probably would have tried to make sure I made these changes before I started the actual coloring, but again, I'm not that upset because I learned a lot from these mistakes. Anyways, I'm a big fan of how this one looks, at least compared to version 1. I definitely think the new version looks a lot better, although it's still not perfect, and I also really don't know what else I can do to improve on it, so let me know down below what other changes I could have made to make this drawing feel a bit more complete. Anyways, I hope you guys had fun watching this video. I know I had a lot of fun making it. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want to see more, and most importantly, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, and goodbye.